Hey everybody, it's Kevin and Zane from the Healthcare Tech Show. Good to see you guys. Zane, how are you, buddy? The
Good,
beard
good.
looks good, by the way.
Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. I try. I try. It's my only
Today,
talent. Growing a beard and sleeping are my two talents.
those are the two talents sleep.
Mhm.
And you can grow a beard while sleeping. So that's an extra, like that's a whole nother level,
Two birds, one stone, right there.
bam, brother. so so I think today is interesting because usually Zane and I talk about stuff we can laugh about. This one, the bias in healthcare AI, is a really good topic though, and one that we've both seen in different ways in different kind of segments throughout the industry, how AI is being trained, all the way down to kind of the impact it's going to make or could make, and then us giving some kind of thoughts on how we can avoid those things, teach folks on what it is, and hopefully help you to better understand the overall AI algorithm and how it will impact you as a healthcare practitioner. Hit the reel. We'll be right back. All right, everybody. So, Guy with a Beard is going to break down for us. If you guys don't know what an AI bias is, or what we're talking about with bias in healthcare AI, we have our bearded colleague right here to be able to tell us all about it.
Yeah. So I mean, bias in AI is. I mean, I think people get confused as to like AI being this like magical thing that always knows the right answers, and the problem with that line of thinking is it's a computer in the end, right? It's a line, a couple of line. Well, in some cases, a couple line of code, or most cases, more than a couple lines. But those lines of code are entered by that, and where does it get that information from? It's by us, right? Up till now, humans have been generating all this information, right? We have been quote unquote the generative AI up till this point. It's just kind of like your child. As your child is growing up, it's going to learn and learn from you, your environment, your things. What school is it going to? What things it's learning at school. So the same thing with AI. It learns exactly what we give it. And one of the issues with that could happen is we can have some bias in the AI system, right? Built in, not because we want it to be built in. It's just the way that our healthcare system operates right now, right? If we look at clinical trials, which is the groundwork for all decisions that we in healthcare make, a lot of those clinical trials are not. Could the results of this trial be extrapolated to the general population, right? So, Kevin, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the majority of the clinical trials that occur are usually, Caucasian males, middle-aged Caucasian males. Not the females are not always a huge part of it unless it's a female-focused study, right? Um, you know, Asians are not usually part of it. African Americans are a little bit more, they're getting more well represented, but still not high. So like in terms of like when we're looking at a paper or a study where we as humans can be like, hey, this is great, but we need to kind of see how it works in the real world versus in the AI, it's not going to go through that process. It's going to be like, hey, all this data we got in, boom, that's now the algorithm. And that's what, but then that can get perpetuated over millions of people without us knowing if it's not something that we're constantly looking at. But then that defeats the purpose of AI because we want a system to kind of help us make the decisions for us, right? So,
Right. Yeah, I think that from just a graphical representation standpoint, this is one of the ones that I pulled up Zane before the show that I thought did a pretty good job of breaking some things down. Personal bias, like what we're choosing to feed an engine, is also part of it. But this one is really looking at data biases, things that are already present in the data that's available that we may not recognize or understand are going to ultimately impact the final product and how it works and who it works best for. And so going through these, just kind of reading through them, and Zane, feel free to comment along the way. But top left corner, so purple corner on there is real world patterns of health inequality and discrimination. So looking at unequal access and resource allocations, discriminatory health care processes, and biased clinical decision making that are kind of already present. And then what happens from that is we get data from that set of information that gets pushed over into sampling biases, lack of representative data sets, as Zane was jumping into, and patterns of bias and discrimination kind of baked into data distribution. So all that being said, you can kind of see this is exactly what Zane just laid out, is saying that there are biases already in the healthcare system. Therefore, those are already causing biases in the sampling data that are currently available. And there's also biases in the sampling data. So now when we're feeding and we're doing the design process and the use process, those can flow quite easily into the rest of the soup. So some examples, Zane, that you or that are your favorite to bring up in healthcare AI bias. Any in particular, bud, you want to jump on?
I mean, I don't know of any right now, but there's definitely things that can happen easily, right? If we say like we intake all the papers for, I don't know, let's pick a specific disease state, right? And if it doesn't have a good sample size of a representation of the population, and that's really important, right? When we're looking at studies and we're trying to extrapolate that data to other people, we're trying to see how diverse the population is. But when you look at clinical trials, it's kind of a catch 22, because when you're going to, I don't know how many people know this, but to be enrolled in a clinical trial, you have to agree to all the appointments, all those things. So usually people that are frail or don't have rides or things like that, where they can't make it to those appointments, then they're usually filtered out, because for the trial they can't get the data that they need, right? And that's not because they're trying to filter them out. It's just that all that costs money. Running a clinical trial is super expensive. There's a reason why most clinical trials are run by drug companies, because they have the money, they're pushing that all there, right? So money is really at the root cause of a lot of things. So I mean, but there are interesting things happening in that. There companies that are looking into doing remote clinical trials. They're popping up all over the place to basically take care of this issue, right? I mean, they're not thinking about AI and bias. They're just looking at bias in our healthcare system in general. And a lot of tech companies are well, I shouldn't say a lot. A lot of them are saying they're trying to decrease the gap of health equality and all that stuff. And that's all for this reason, is because it exists. And my problem is, I feel like in digital health, we're trying to just skip steps, right? We're just like jumping over, there's like this meme or something where this guy is like walking over like 5 steps, right? And we're like skipping all these steps that we need. We don't have a good ground base to kind of build everything off of, right? First, and it's going to take time, and I think that's what people don't want to hear, but it's going to take time. We need to fix the clinical trial system. We need to at least move towards fixing health equity, access to care, like actually fixing it. Not saying that we're fixing it and then only running it in big cities. Like I'm talking about like full on scale. But those are hard things to do. But I think those are things that we have to be aware of, because if we just put our head in the sand, then we're going to make the problem way worse. We all have biases. I have my own biases, right? You have your biases. No one is just, oh, I have zero biases, I don't see this color. We all do, right? It's just some of us act on it, some of us don't act on it, some of us don't even know we're acting on it. So I don't know, I'm kind of going in the roundabout way, saying that, hey, humans are biased, hence AI will be biased, and we need to create a system that is literally preventing us from being biased. And until we can do that, then the AI systems that we create is always going to be biased. Not always, but is going to lean towards the bias.
No, I think you bring up a ton of really, really good points inside of there. And like looking at like ways forward that I was reading just here on this McKinsey and Company kind of breakdown, they said like step 1 is be aware of contexts in which AI can help correct for bias and those in which there is high risk for AI to exacerbate bias. Interestingly, the being aware, Zane, I feel like is almost jumps to the very end. You've got to diversify your team. Like you have to diversify the individuals that are part of the decision-making process. And at the very least, the advisors and or patient panels that you are working with inside of healthcare, so that you can start recognizing those things very early on, when you're creating these systems. The next step they talk about is establish processes and practices to test for and mitigate bias in AI systems. You and I are just talking about one that there's basically an AI system that's being fed a ton of images that are primarily women cooking. And so because of that, when it was asked to be able to identify, is this a man or a woman cooking, it didn't get it right. It chose that it was a woman cooking when it was actually a man cooking, for example. So if you're feeding a system, a consistent level of bias, then the results are something like in pharmacogenomics that we end up having. Here's something that the CPIC guidelines have put out. Here's something that PharmGKB has put out. Here's something that the FDA is putting out. But that genetic profile does not relate as well to this demographic or this population set that we can just take it as a, umbrella type of statement. Exact same thing in prescribing. We already know there are certain medications that do not work as well in certain subsets and populations. We often find that out later in life, that we're saying it doesn't work as well because we know that we've seen folks have these reactions or have these issues that are post clinical trials that have already happened. So there's that piece. Any thoughts, Zane, on that? The next one, though, is the one I really wanted your thought on. Engage in fact-based conversations about potential biases in human decisions. That one's a tough for me to wrap my mind around there, Zane. Have you seen successful practices, or what do you think of that in general?
I think that in the healthcare community, we try to be unbiased, or we like to portray that we are unbiased, but we are very biased. And I know people will not like hearing that, but it's the truth. And unless we look ourselves in the mirror and really, like, kind of what they said, like, we literally go through the process. Because for me, anytime, and this is going to be kind of like me speaking out of both sides of my mouth, but anytime you have a human intervention in a system, like a human making a decision in a system, they're going to insert their own bias, right? Like, I'm going to insert my own bias based on my own personal beliefs or experiences or whatever, right? Like, I have different ways of handling things than, let's say, a first year pharmacist or somebody who grew up here or lived here or somebody that went from somewhere else. And I think that we need to really look at how we make our decisions. And that's why, that's why evidence-based medicine is so important, because it is a step to take away that bias, right? But then the problem is that that is a step to take away bias, but that in itself is biased, right? So
Yes.
it's not a perfect system, but it's better than just kind of like, okay, I think this is what it's going to be. So I think we as a healthcare community kind of need to do a root cause analysis of all these things. I mean, evidence-based is the way to go, but now, okay, let's look at our evidence. Is there evidence biased? In most cases, yes, it is. No, I'm not saying it's meant to be that way. It just happens to be that way just because of the infrastructure that we have. So then now we have to look at the infrastructure that we've built to yield us these results. Can we help? Can we change it? Right? And those are the questions we need to be asking right now, rather than, oh no, we're perfect, we do great. We are looking at every paper, this and this, and we are doing, like, that's great. Not poo-pooing that. Good, you should be doing that. But great, you've met that bar. Now let's go higher. Like, it's not about, okay, meeting the minimum. We need to keep moving up to excellence.
Yeah, I think it's funny because we're using, like, bias almost seems like the negative term, right? But bias in general is just a recognition of, like, life experience or understanding. And maybe even the more positive term is we just need to make our data more representative, of the diverse populations we could be helping or dealing with inside of these individual spaces, so that we don't cause issues or confusion or problematic situations for healthcare practitioners with tools we're developing that could have that bias already kind of instituted. One interesting thing I think for me is not using AI, not going down the road is problematically, we can't find those biases because we're not creating things. So just as important is to go down that road and then continue to validate, each one of those steps using a diverse team. And that's really the whole decision making. It's not we have to stop AI in its tracks because it's going to give us biased data. Well, we already know that, right? We already know that what we can feed it is biased, already. But having the recognition skills to find where the biases are and then be able to deal with those within the algorithm and creation and further feeding of data, I think is a really interesting next step, especially seeing CVS's thing. I don't know if you saw that, Zane, but they pulled out of the clinical trial space. And so I think the clinical trial space is now becoming really interesting on how we're able to pull massive amounts of crowdsourced data and other information that can give us more diverse, information that is representative to feed in. Any final or closing thoughts, buddy, on that?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Biases are not always bad. Sometimes biases are good. They help us, make better decisions based on things that we've seen in the past, right? Another thing with AI that's kind of problematic sometimes when you get into, like, the neural networks, it's like a black box. We don't really know how it's making its decisions. So that's one thing that we as a medical community need to either fix or come to grips with. But if we come to grips with it, we need to really make sure we have our ducks in a row, kind of like you mentioned. But I mean, I don't want to shine a negative light on everything. We are going in a good direction. It's not that I love AI. I love all these things. Anyone who's ever read anything or talked or heard me talk, I love these things. But we still need to be aware of what could go wrong, and rather than after the fact, oh my god, and we never saw this coming. No, we did see this coming. We just chose to ignore it. And that's all I'm saying. Like, just don't ignore it, but that shouldn't stop you from moving forward.
Oh yes. Yeah. No, I think that it's like any tool, recognizing that yes, AI is going to be the future of medicine. Machine learning, is going to be the future of medicine, how we adopt it and utilize it and have some level of synchronicity with it. But like any tool, you have to know how to leverage it appropriately, what its limitations are, et cetera, and the spaces you're not going to use it in. So for example, if I'm going to be doing glass work, I'm probably not going to use a hammer to work with glass. A little bit different with wood. So I think there's a really easy way for us to start finessing some elements and recognizing the necessity of where we insert humans to be able to see some of those biases and be able to help out with that overall. But awesome conversation, buddy. Glad you pulled that one up. If you guys want to learn more, please jump onto Digital Thoughts and read all this awesome stuff that Zane's putting out there. Same thing. He has a ton of great guests on his podcast, and he's putting out now 2 per week. And getting those burning. So that's very impressive. And then join us on the Digital Thoughts channel. We'll be making lots of changes to the platform to make it more tech savvy. So we're really excited to bring those kind of changes along. So join rphally.com and we will see you guys over there.
Bye, guys.